Welcome to G.I. Joe Chronicles, Outpost Edition.
I trust your mission was equally well executed.
I want a stone cold righteous attention.
Militarily speaking, it's only fair to say that Cobra Commander is a world-class buffoon.
Welcome to G.I. Joe Chronicles, Outpost Episode 5. I am Jim Meal, also known as Jim the Joe Junkie. Over the course of this podcast, we intend to chronologically discuss the toys, comics, cartoons, and many other aspects of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, which is my favorite pop culture subject. Without getting too bogged down in the details, just my co-host and I having a conversation and reminiscing. And joining me today to discuss these classic comics is DJ Cristados, Pat Sampson. Thanks for returning to the Outpost, Pat, so that we can discuss more issues of a great comic.
Well, Jim, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm really enjoying myself here in the Outpost. Jarrod told me that there were some figures here that I should come and take a look at. Maybe a shirtless mindbender that I could probably grab, or maybe find a cape for the one that I have.
Yeah, I don't have a cape for mindbender, so yeah, I've got a shirtless one over there in the Terrordrome. So
I you know what? I think that's a big conspiracy for Mindbender, because I think he didn't want the cape anyway. And we're like, hey man, you got to have a cape on at least for something. We just can't have a shirtless figure running around like this. So I think Mindbender's got his thing on this, and he just wants to be shirtless. You know, like the leader of Cobra, Serpentor, he just wants to not have any pants on.
Not long after Mindbender, there was Raptor, Big Boa. None of them had shirts, so you might be onto something, Pat.
Yeah, they're trying to start a boy band. You know, Magic Mike, Magic Joe's.
Also lurking in the background is Jarrod Alberich, the yard sale artist.
That's what you guys do when I leave the Outpost. That's what you do. You go, it's all shirtless Joes and Magic Mike references, and all right, I'm down.
Jarrod,
yeah, let's do this. I guess.
Jarrod, who's your favorite shirtless G.I. Joe?
Big Boa, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't think of any than the three that Jim just rattled off, and I was like Big Boa or Raptor, Mindbender. Yeah, I guess Big Boa, sure.
What about Road Pig?
Oh yeah.
Oh, Road Pig, that's a good one. Gung Ho.
Gung Ho, yeah, Gung Ho.
He's on the border.
Yeah.
It counts. I say it counts.
Jarrod will be lurking in the background, popping in every now and then just to give his 2 cents.
I do what I want.
So, Pat, before we get started, is there a secret mission that has been declassified enough that you can share it with us?
Well, Jim, there actually has, and it's just fresh off the declassified list. Just recently, we've had a big snowstorm come, so I was able to get out my polar bear and kind of drive it around here in these wintry weathers up here. Well, you know, Jim, you probably had the same.
You stole my secret mission.
Mine goes a little bit deeper. So now that I'm done with this, I've got a ticket to Springfield. So I'm going to go hang out at the beaches. I might go and see a shuttle launching or something like that. And then from there, I'm going to go a little bit even souther to a nicer, warmer city. Maybe do some scuba diving or something like that. I heard there's some bunkers underneath there that I could kind of check out. I'm just looking to get out of this winter weather.
See, you stole my secret mission because over this past week, we got a lot of snow as well here in West Michigan. And I got my snowmobile, my polar battle bear out, and took a few laps around the yard and took it down the road and broke it. So I had to get it home, and I got it repaired. So it's up and running again. But no, I'm all for you for getting a little bit warmer weather. I don't know if I want to go all the way to South America, though.
You got to do what you got to do.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks for sharing your declassified mission. This episode, we will be discussing the Marvel Comics issues 8 through 13 from 1983. Previously, I had stated that we would be covering a full year of comic book issues. Instead, we're going to break each year into 2 episodes. This will allow us to take a more in-depth look into each issue. As we go forward, we will attempt to stay in the calendar year that the comics were released in, but we will adjust the issues that we will be covering if we need to, so that multiple issue stories are covered in the same episode. And we may not be reviewing the entirety of every issue either, but we will be discussing highlights of the issues we are covering, favorite moments, favorite covers, new characters paid the ultimate sacrifice, and whatever else we feel like discussing. To make sure that we are giving each issue some attention, we will go through and state the issue title, a brief description of the story in that issue, as well as the creators. We will be getting our information from yojo.com and 3djoes.com. So let's begin with some short descriptions. Pat, I'm going to let you start with issue 8. I could tell from the first comic book episode that we did that you really like issue number 8.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. I do. I know in the last what we talked about, I kind of was getting mixed up of where we were at on this, but seeing this cover definitely brings me back in the story. So for issue number 8, it is called Sea Strike. Script and art by Herb Trimpe. Letter, it goes to Rick Parker. Colorist is Christy Sheely. Editor is Denny O'Neil. Editor-in-chief is Jim Shooter, and the cover artist is Mike Vosberg and Jack Abel. In this issue, the Joes are sent on a mission to protect a shuttle that is launching a satellite that is designed to detect Cobra underwater bases. After a battle on land, sea, air, and space, the Joes are victorious over Cobra, but Cobra Commander escapes.
Issue 9 is called The Diplomat. The creative team, the writer was Stephen Grant. Penciler, Mike Vosberg. Inks, Chick Stone. Letterers, Janice Chang. Colorist, Andy Yankus. Editor, Dennis O'Neil. Editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter. And cover artist, Mike Vosberg. Synopsis goes like this. Clutch and Scarlet, with support by Snake Eyes and Stalker, are given a mission to protect a State Department diplomat named Brian Hassel, actually a Cobra agent. Clutch and Scarlet fight off several Cobra attacks that are intended to make the Joes believe that Hassel is a legitimate target. Snake Eyes and Stalker do investigating around the world, always running into Cobra trouble. Brian Hassel turns on Scarlet and Clutch and attempts to kill an ambassador from Al-Y. The assassination attempt fails.
All right, that'll take us into issue number 10, which some might sound a little bit familiar. It's a nice little town like ours. The creators for this one scripter was Larry Hama. Pencils were done by Mike Vosberg. Chick Stone did the inks. Joe Rosen did the letter. And Christy Sheely did the colors. Danny O'Neil was the editor, and Jim Shooter was editor-in-chief. In this issue, Snake Eyes, Scarlet, and Zap are captured by the Baroness and brought to Springfield. Ooh, that city sounds familiar. Cobra's headquarters. There, Snake Eyes is subject to the brainwave scanner that is run by Dr. Venom. Snake Eyes' past is revealed to Dr. Venom in his search for the G.I. Joe base. Scarlet and Zap are in prison cell with a little boy who helps them escape. They collect Snake Eyes and escape from the town. The boy elects to stay behind. What happens to him? Who knows? We'll find out.
Only time will tell. Issue 11, The Pipeline Ploy. Creative team is writers Larry Hama, penciler Mike Vosberg, inks John D'Agostino, letterer Rick Parker, colorist Christine Sheely, editor Danny O'Neil, editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, cover artist Bob Camp. And the synopsis goes like this. In Alaska, the G.I. Joe team is fighting against Cobra to protect an oil pipeline. New Joe team members show up to help in the fight. An unseen Cobra specialist, Destro, is trying to steal plutonium from a nuclear power plant. The Joes are able to foil him and prevent Cobra from getting such a powerful weapon.
Then we go on over to issue number 12, called 3 Strikes for Snake Eyes. The writer was Larry Hama. Pencils go to Mike Vosberg. The inks go to John D'Agostino.
These nuts.
Oh, Jim dropping the D's nuts. Whoa. He's been waiting on that one, wouldn't he? Well done, Jim. Well done. Letter goes to Joe Rosen. Colors is, wow, the one, the only, color me bad, colorist, Glennis Wee. Surprise, surprise. Editor goes to Denny O'Neil. Editor-in-chief is Jim Shooter, and the cover art goes to Mike Vosberg. And in this issue, after the Joes chase down a shipment of missile guidance chips, the clues lead them to the country of Sierra Gordo. Stalker, Gung-Ho, Breaker, and Snake Eyes track Cobra to the offices of the Naja Trading Corporation, where Snake Eyes recognizes Dr. Venom. The Joes and Cobra engage in a firefight that is ended by the mercenary Quinn, who was hired by Cobra to ensure the safe delivery of the computer chips. Snake Eyes is left dead in the burning Naja trading building, but he was using skills he learned to control his breath and heartbeat. As all the players converge on the island bunker, the Joes escape. Snake Eyes attempts to stop the exchange of the computer chips for a dangerous virus and not the computer kind. As Snake Eyes assaults Dr. Venom, the Baroness bombs the bunker. Did Quinn save Dr. Venom and Snake Eyes by pushing them into the bunker? Or are they all at the bottom of the river?
Issue 13, Last Plane from Rio Lindo. Creative team was Larry Hama, penciler Mike Vosberg, John D'Agostino, letterer Joe Rosen, colorist Bob Sharon, editor Denny O'Neil, editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, and cover artist was Mike Vosberg and John D'Agostino. And the synopsis goes like this. Gung-Ho, Stalker, and Breaker are in need of help in Sierra Gordo. Hawk leads Scarlet, Rock and Roll, Grunt, Torpedo, and Doc on a mission to rescue them. In the process of this rescue, the Joes gather some very important planet information about Cobra. Snake Eyes, Quinn, and Dr. Venom are presumed dead. With all the issue details out of the way, we're going to move on to our first segment called General Issues.
What's in store for G.I. Joe? Find out in Marvel Comics.
These 6 issues include some single stories and some that would begin a memorable and important storyline that will affect the current Joe comic book. Many new toy-based characters were introduced, new supporting characters were introduced, as well as some returning non-toy characters. These issues, it seemed that Larry Hama was given a green light just as long as he introduced most of the toys that were being produced for that year. Sometimes he would introduce them all in one issue, for example, issue number 11. There were also times that I think the artist had some early designs for the toys because sometimes the characters and vehicles were just a little bit different than their toy release. Reviewing these comics this way made me realize how full throttle this comic book was. I had a difficult time finding a good place to separate the 83 comics. This full throttle pace continues for almost the entire Marvel run. There aren't very many lulls in the 155 issues of the Marvel run. And let's not forget the 28 issues of special missions. But Larry took a little 2-issue break before starting this historic run. Issues 8 and 9 were not written by Larry Hama. Issue 8 was written by Herb Trimpe and issue 9 by Stephen Grant. And upcoming issue 20 is also written by Steve Grant. This doesn't happen again until issue 119, which is written and drawn by Herb Trimpe, and a couple times in the 140s and 150s. I said all that so we can discuss some great comics. So Pat, let's start by discussing some of the stories, plot lines, and some defining moments from issues 8 through 13. So are there any storylines that you really want to bring out, Pat?
Well, I think the big thing in these that we're covering, you have a lot of the beginnings of stuff that will last throughout the G.I. Joe history and stories and more stories to come and so forward. I'll get into some of that a little bit later, but as you mentioned before, I want to talk about issue 8. Even though it's a one-off, to me, it is one that is kind of near and dear to my heart, just because it was one that I had growing up as a kid. I still have the one, and it's just in pieces because I would read this thing over and over and over because it was such a good one-shot issue. You have Cobra Commander, who's just really being kind of aggressive with what he's trying to do and take down the shuttle and to make sure that it should go down so it doesn't get launched up so they can find their underwater sea base that they go into. And the vehicles that they have there are really cool. I like the sea boat with the plane on the back and that it can go underwater. It's really cool. And then you have these Cobra vehicles. Through this earlier series, you don't see a lot of cool Cobra vehicles, or if you do, they're not the ones that we all know and love now. Like this one with the sea legs, these things were kind of cool looking. I'm like, man, I wish they would have these some more. You know, they were AT-AT walkers that were really cool to see. But some of the other vehicles that they use throughout some of the other issues in here for Cobra, you don't see them down the road anymore because now you get, you know, you have the Fang, you have the tanks, you have all that other stuff that they didn't have. And you definitely saw a lot of the Joe vehicles because, again, like they were trying to sell it. Going back to issue 8 and that story, it just really meant a lot because this was one that I would pour over reading it. I'm pretty sure I got this at the local PDQ when I got it. And so it would just be one that I know by heart. But just by looking at that cover and issue 9, 2 of them that I had back to back that I would really enjoy seeing. And that moment when issue 9, when Clutch pops up out of the sand with that gun, man. Oh, such a cool thing to do and see. What about you, Jim?
It's not written by Larry Hama, written by Herb Trimpe, which is probably in line with characterization of, like you said, Cobra Commander. It's that devious Cobra Commander that we got throughout the whole comic run. It was consistent. And I'm like you, these vehicles, they're crazy in this issue.
Yeah, they're kind of
crazy. But you don't see them again. Cobra gets, the toys are released. You get the Fang, the Hiss, the all these other ones, and on and on. So you don't see a lot of single issue, I guess one shots almost, I would consider them in the Joe run. But when you do, they're still pretty good.
I thought these 2 issues being singles were standout single issues. We like to say, the fillers, but this is a filler I'd like to eat, and I enjoyed eating it.
Yeah, it was issue 9 was a good globe-trotting adventure. A couple teams going all over the world. Clutch and Scarlet protecting the Diplomat. You mentioned Clutch coming out of the sand, but as a boy, I was looking more at Scarlet in the bikini there.
Well, I didn't want to play my card that right away, Jim, but
Again, like you said, they were filler issues, but they were good filler issues. And I think it was just, as I mentioned, ramping up for Larry Hama to just make that legendary.
I think so too.
Run.
Jarrod, what's your thoughts on these 2?
Since I'm just sort of an add-on to this episode, I want to point out just some fun, I guess, more specific things about these 2, since you guys are doing a great job of covering the broad brush. When it comes to 8, I should preface this by saying I had these in the little digest size as a kid. So I've read them, but man, my memory of them are not great. There's some that I read over and over and I know really well. And then there's some that I read, once or twice and I just don't remember them as well. And these fall into that camp, but there are certain things that I remember and I find striking. So I'll just cover those real quick. In 8, I cannot get enough of Cobra Commander in the red, weather slicker for out to sea. Like that's a cool look for him. That is
he's baller in that.
Very cool look.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. It stuck with me. And the walkers that come out of the sea, Cobra Sea Legs, I think they're called. You mentioned those already, Pat. Those are neat. And dude, this one 8 has Stalker in a jetpack. Meow, 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 meow. So can't go wrong with that. The only other thing I think I wanted to mention about 8 is I very recently, within the last couple months, found a copy of 8 from Tales of G.I. Joe when Marvel was reprinting them. And I don't mean to step on this, or this is something you're going to get later, Jim. But I thought it'd be fun to bring it up here because I'm able to do a side-by-side comparison. And I just think it's neat. There's not much difference, really, other than, of course, it says Tales of G.I. Joe over the G.I. Joe, where G.I. Joe normally would be. Otherwise, the cover's the same, except for, I thought this was neat, the corner box changed. In the original, it's Grunt, and in the reprint, it is General Hawk up there. Hawk. Oh, and also, the original was 60 cents, and by 1988, it was $1.50. 5 years, jumped 90 cents. I was tickled pink to find these Tales of G.I. Joe, though, because I've heard people talk about them. Yeah. I've never seen them. This is the first time I found one. I found this in a dollar bin when I was down in Tallahassee hanging out with Shag. I found this in a dollar bin. And I was like, I've never seen a Tales of G.I. Joe before. It's the first time I ever laid hands on them.
That's how I consumed these early issues, because I didn't get into the Joe comics until later in the issue 80s. The Tales of G.I. Joe were more affordable than the actual issues.
Well, I'm looking at this, and it looks like Tales of G.I. Joe. Clearly, I looked inside. Comes out in 88, which means I'm smack dab in the middle of living in Germany, and I don't think Stars and Stripes bookstore carried it. I think that's why I've never seen it.
Okay.
And I never needed it, though, because, like I said, Jason and I were collecting this book from day one. Like, we had issues 1 and 2, and, you'd miss a few here and there because you're buying them off the spinner rack, which is why I can't remember. I think it might have been my grandmother or maybe one of my aunts who was giving me the digests, which was super handy because not only does it fill in the issues I'm missing, but it's extremely portable. Great to take on road trips. Of course, as I've creeped into my later 40s, they are hard to read.
Yeah.
But anyway, enough of 8. Just quick memories of 9. I do have a little bit more stronger memories of 9. Clearly, Scarlet in the bikini is something I remember. I do remember Clutch coming out of the sand. Like, how long were you buried under that sand with that automatic rifle, dude? By the way, sand in the barrel is not a good thing, so he got away with one there. But I tell you what, as I was flipping through it, you guys were talking about what jumped out at me, just a moment that really stuck with me. Like, yes, I remember that moment because it's executed so well in comic book, the craft of making comics, is Scarlet coming through the window on the skis.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason it works well is we've talked about this on a couple other shows, Pat. When you want a big reveal or a big moment, make them turn the page to it.
Mm-hmm.
But at least in the collected edition, you have to turn the page. If you have the original issue, you can let me know if it's the same way. You see her coming in the last 2 panels. You have to turn the page to see the Kool-Aid Man moment.
Yeah.
Busting through the window like, oh, yeah. And that's just great comic craft, because I love how she starts small in the background, closer, boom. That's just something that stuck with me through all these years, is that moment. So that's all I have to add to you guys' chat about 8 and 9.
Oh, very cool observations.
Very good observations. Thanks for that, Jarrod. I want to move on to what is Pat alluded to a little bit. In issue 10, this is the second time we've heard of Springfield mentioned in the Joe Comic Book. And it's confirmed as a Cobra base in issue 10, where Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and Zap was captured and brought to Springfield. First time what was mentioned was the brainwave scanner, which some people feel is used too often. That's one of those things that you either like it or you don't. Back to Springfield. It was mentioned in issue 5 with the marching band in Tanks for the Memories. And now they were captured and brought to Springfield. That will go on and on through the whole series, where Springfield is their town until around issue 50, isn't it? When the town gets blown up and evacuated.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how Springfield kind of rises up and just becomes this additional character, so to say, for Cobra.
Yes.
In what it is. And, and just you find out more and more just about the people in later issues and just how, kind of brainwashed they are in a way to, that it's just a town full of Cobra people. Even though they look like normal people doing normal things, there's always something else going on in the background in this place. Even in this one, the arcade, and you find out that, underneath that arcade is where the brainwave scanner is. And of course, Snake Eyes, he's got, he always gets first seat in that all the time. So whenever you need something, put Snake Eyes in there so we can kind of figure it out what's happening with him. But I like too that this begins Snake Eyes' story a little bit more. You see bits and pieces on the video that he's trying to hide, or at least he's letting that information out, even though it hurts him, because he doesn't want to give up where the G.I. Joe base is. So he's just giving this stuff out, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. And it makes you want to know a little bit more about Snake Eyes. It takes a while. Larry lets this one kind of stew for a while, right?
He lets it stew for a while, and then he adds to it all the way through the whole Marvel run. He keeps adding to it. It brings in more characters with Zartan and then Firefly. What starts out as a simple secret, it just keeps going.
Definitely. And then we have Billy. For a long time, we're like, who's this kid that's in here? And when you were reading it back then, before the big reveal later on, it's like, oh, holy cow, that's who that kid was way back then. Every summer, I would go through a reread up to whatever the latest issue was, going back to a reread. And then finally, when you got to the reveal of who Billy was, and you're like, oh, he was a kid way back in this issue. And just to see, and his dad was doing that to him. Wow.
I don't know that Larry Hama intended for Billy to be Cobra Commander's son until later on. Now, what did you think about Billy was talking about the pyramid schemes of how Cobra was created? It was one panel, and they elaborate on it later in, I think, issues 30 or so. They expanded on even more around issues 30. Where it says it was one of those pyramid schemes. They got you to sell household cleaning products for extra money and encourage you to get others involved. I don't know about you guys, but here in Michigan, there was a certain company that they really promoted that pyramid scheme where you sell
Was it
cleaning
Amway?
products, and you get Amway. Absolutely. There is actually in Grand Rapids is the Amway headquarters, which is not far from where I grew up. When I read that as a teenager, I'm like, wait a minute, what's he saying? So
yeah, Larry was definitely taking shots at Amway.
Oh yeah. I want to talk about, we talked about Snake Eyes' past. In issue 11, Destro's introduced, and we find out, I don't remember if it was issue 11 or if it was a later issue, but we find out that the Baroness and Destro have a past.
It becomes later
they hint
issue.
at it a little bit. So I thought that was interesting. That's one of those things that's the full extent of it isn't revealed until issues, was it 93, 94, 95, 96, the Snake Eyes trilogy, where they really he explains how the Destro and Baroness met as teenagers.
Again, it's just Larry just weaving this tale, and him knowing he's got all this information and characters that he's built up that he could just pull this stuff back and pull it together. I think Larry was told that, Larry would just write, and he didn't know how the story would end in the issue he was writing, Yeah. So just the mind that he has to do this that's what makes this series so special, when he writes it.
We're covering right now the beginning of it. This is where the first 7 issues were great. Pretty much he was telling single story issues up until this point, and then he just went all out, weaving those characters together. Hasbro finally gave him some characters to use other than some simple Cobra Troopers. So yeah, the way he weaves everybody in and out characters is really good.
Jarrod, do you have any thoughts on issues 10 and 11?
Sure. There are certain things that jump out to me, memories that flood back. Definitely have strong memories of the nightmarish things going on from the drugs that they're giving the Joes in issue 10. Definitely have a strong memory of Snake Eyes in the brainwave machine, thinking of that apple, like just apple. Like all he's trying to do is just think of one thing so they can't get information. That is something that stuck with me for that. If you said, hey, Jarrod, what do you know about, Snake Eyes and the brainwave machine? I'd be like, apple. That's all. That's what I was thinking about. And of course, like you mentioned, Pat, the snippets of his history, these are little pieces and parts of something that we now know is some tremendous lore. I did not realize that was Billy that was in the cell with them until you guys brought it up just now.
Well, they don't mention his name at all.
Right.
Nope. They don't mention his name.
What I'm fascinated about, I do remember Snake Eyes' escape. I thought, because I always remember when he punches the guard and the thwack and the punch motion, they use that to cover his face. Like, that was cool comic craft stuff. And then he hits the other guy, Dr. Venom, who I'm still surprised to this day never got a figure. Like, what the hell, man? But then he grabs his mask and he takes off. Those are very vivid to me. But what I'm surprised is not vivid to me is, like, how did I forget that they had like a working laser turret inside of an arcade? Like, that's
Springfield. Why wouldn't you?
Bonkers stuff that
the turret went in and then the arcade built up around it.
It was apparently that's how it worked. And I do have a memory of the Incredible Hulk making an appearance at the very end. Quote unquote appearance. And so those are my quick flashes of memory for 10. 11, really the most memorable thing about it is the cover. It's a great cover. It's a really good use of color and energy. And as I believe Jim was mentioning earlier, if I'm not mistaken, this is where we get to meet a lot of the new Joes, and they're featured here on the cover.
Yes.
And just it's so vibrant with its coloring, with its very, very, very light yellow to deep yellow to orange background, a lot of motion, the blue wing of the Cobra glider, whatever the hell that thing was called. Jim, you and I covered on our Joe Figures podcast recently. I don't remember what
the
it's
Cobra
called.
Viper.
Okay.
The Viper glider.
All I know is that guy doesn't have a silver emblem on his chest like he's supposed to. But anyway, that cover is definitely striking. It's funny. There's not a lot in the book as I flip through it that I have a strong memory of other than this book. I don't know what the timing was. If this might have just predated Inspector Gadget. but Destro's handled much like, what was his name, Professor Claw or Dr. Claw or whatever.
Dr. Claw.
Yeah, definitely.
Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. I'm getting some serious Inspector Gadget vibes off of how he's handled in the shadows and all that for this issue. But it's amazing to me that I don't really remember. Like, the only real stick to it memory as I flip through it, I go, oh yeah, other than of course the hand of Destro, is when they deploy the G.I. Joe hang glider. Help me out, Jim. What's that one called?
Falcon glider.
That Falcon glider, Pat. Yeah. But when they deploy it, it has like this neat motion thing. Like he comes out of the Huey and the wings spread and it's like, pow. That part I do remember, but the rest really wasn't super memorable to me. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, we're talking about, probably 10-year-old Jarrod's brain here. So
well, I think it's cool because you get good toy placements. Like you said, the Viper, the Falcon, the Polar Bear. I mean, the Polar Bear is a cool vehicle, but also you get the His Tank.
His Tank, yep,
is very cool to see.
Yeah, the vehicles overall, we've seen a lot of vehicles in the issues up to 11 that were never made. Right? It feels like they didn't quite. It feels like Ron Rudat and those guys developing the characters, the figures were probably way ahead of whatever guys were in charge of developing the vehicles. And that was what was coming across the desk over with Larry and Herb.
Yeah.
And so Larry and Herb are sort of filling in the blanks of maybe this will be, they get some right. I mean, like the Vamp and stuff, but and the Ram. To me, it feels like it really starts, like the cohesion of figures and vehicles on it starts in 11.
I think you're right on that. That's where we start things get ramping up. What I like about this one too is even though the characters we're used to how they look, these guys look cool with their winter gear on. You see Wild Bill in a nice winter coat, with the fur on him. He looks cool
with the fur.
What about Gung Ho though? He doesn't have any winter gear on.
Well, yeah, I know. They're laying in this. They're laying cover, they're trying to hide, and there's Gung Ho laying in the snow. That's my man, Gung Ho. He's part of the shirtless guys. But how cool like that.
If he's not careful, he's going to become Frostbite.
Oh, since we're talking about issue 11, and you guys touched on it with the vehicles, and I mentioned it earlier, the character designs. If you look at Wild Bill, he does not look like his character release. His uniform doesn't look like him, and he's flying a Huey, not his Dragonfly. So I thought that was unique, which fit the mission. So I understand that it fit the mission. I do like the take on, as Pat said, that the winter gear. They don't have to be in their uniform. They need to be dressed for the environment.
I want to add to that too. I want to bring the military authenticity to the show, since I do live and have lived around Fort Rucker, the home of RVA Aviation. For most of my life, because it's what my dad did in the Army. That would make perfect sense, because back then in the 80s, the aircraft that you trained on and learned on was the UH-1. And then after you learned that, then you moved on to attack helicopter, more specifics, because the UH-1 was sort of the general use helicopter. So that actually fits. Like my dad would have learned to fly a UH-1 first and then moved on to so they can kind of get away with that. We'll no prize that one. It's another missed opportunity, really. It would have been relatively easy for them to make a UH-1 utility helicopter for the G.I. Joes, but they don't really make a utility style helicopter until what is it called? The Tomahawk, I think?
Yep. Yeah. Tomahawk. Issue 11. This wasn't my first issue that I bought, but I remember where I got it. I was at Boy Scouts, and some of us were talking, and a guy's like, "Hey, I got some G.I. Joe issues. You want them?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I'll take them." Issue 10 and 11 are the ones he brought in. I still have them, and as you guys can see, they've got holes in the spines from me reading and rereading. And similar to you always remember where you got that issue. It's weird. And I think I mentioned to you on the last episode, Pat, whenever I go to a different town or travel somewhere, I find a comic book store and go buy a couple comics from one of the local comic book stores. Yeah. That's just one of the things I do when my wife and I are traveling, or I'm out for business or something. And I always remember, hey, this is where I got this comic book at. So,
yeah, that's good memories to have.
Now, I think the next two that we're going to discuss are going to be wrapped up in one. And this is a big discussion. 12 and 13 are the Sierra Gordo mission, where the Joes travel down to Sierra Gordo meet Quinn again. And
yes,
Quinn. Now, I want to bring up as you were reading the synopsis, Pat, if you are able to go to it's the page where Clutch gets shot in the top right-hand corner, go all the way down to the second where Scarlett's looking at the sign for the Najak Trading Corporation. Look at the name on the bottom. Attention, Senior K. Wynn.
Oh, yeah.
I had never noticed that. That's the first time I noticed that today. I was surprised. I wanted to get that out before we started talking about the whole issue. But I'm like, he was telling him, hey, Quinn's going to be there. I thought that was neat. But
yeah, that's a little callback and a little nugget kind of hidden there for what's to come.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the overall these two issues of the first Sierra Gordo mission? It's not resolved because where we leave off, Dr. Venom, Quinn, and Snake Eyes were still trapped in the bunker. What are your overall thoughts on that?
Again, this is Larry building the story up. This issue 12 through, is it 15? 12 to 15, that this kind of the arc that kind of happens. And I guess you would say this is like, the first chapter, and then 14 and 15 kind of finish it off for now. But this is the beginning of the bigger storytelling, the continuation of seeds that are planted and moving forward. And the more episodic Joe is starting here between this series and all that. It just pulls you in. And, I really liked Quinn when he showed up before, but I think too, that had to do something with, I was reading, these later on. So you have that nostalgic feel of, Quinn comes back later on. So here's this first appearance of Quinn in issue 2. Now you get to see him really be, the bad kind of guy that he is. Is he going to be a good guy? Is he not going to be a good guy? And you get to see him earlier in his winter gear. Now you get to see him in his summer gear, It's just, how cool is he looking in that summer gear? He's like Crocodile Dundee, but he's way bigger than Crocodile Dundee is.
I say Quinn was doing like what we were talking about. We wanted to get out of the cold weather. He moved down. He went all the way down south to on vacation down there. But he did a similar thing in these issues as he did in issue 2. Once his contract was finished,
yep,
he with Cobra, he was helping the Joes. He was keeping Snake Eyes safe, and he's honorable to the T with the contract. But once the contract is fulfilled, all bets are off. Now, something I want to bring up, and you guys can chime in because you guys have done more comic reviews and stuff than me. But take issue 12 for example. Nowadays, how many issues would that be for a writer that would be like 3 or 4 issues. I was doing the synopsis for it, and there was so much going on. I'm like, how do you break that down without writing a novel? Was that your guys' take on that as well? I mean, 13 is similar too, with so much action, so much going on that nowadays it'd be a 4 or 5 issue story arc.
I can see where you're kind of going with it. It would probably have been dragged out a little bit longer. I think, Larry had a story to tell, and it is. I mean, it is kind of dragged out between the later issues for this whole Sierra Gorda and just, this Dr. Venom series of where, you get a little more character of Dr. Venom and just how his interactions are with Quinn, with Snake Eyes.
I think what really tells the tale is the panel count. If you look at the average panel per page on this, it's high. There's a lot of, I'm looking at one right now. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's a lot of 9, 10 panels per page. I couldn't tell you any modern comic that's doing more, like 6 is probably the highest end for a panel count these days per page. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of story going on there.
And it's not too wordy, really.
That's what I was going to say. It's not a Chris Claremont. X-Men.
Well, at least I didn't have to say it,
No, but it's not with all this panel counts. He is letting the art tell the story here.
Yep.
Speaking of the art, I want to chime in here. If you've ever flipped through, like, let's say 12 and 13, and really pay attention to the art, and it really comes out in the inking. A lot of the facial expressions are, and faces in general, are borderline a little more cartoony than you might think. If you go to, like, let's say 12, and you look at where Stalker and Breaker are walking around downtown, and Breaker's blowing a bubble, and he's kind of looking over his shoulder. It kind of has almost an older school, almost 60s Marvel feel to it. Like Breaker looks like Peter Parker was drawn in the 60s.
Yep.
And Stalker's a little. It's just really clean and solid lines. It's almost. Look, if you go to the next page, from what I referenced, someone's at the very first panel. Someone's looking the binoculars at Venom, Stalker, and Breaker, and Stalker and Breaker have, again, almost a little cartoony thing, and I can tell you exactly why that is, and now you'll never be able to get out of your brain. It's because of the inkers, John D'Agostino, who for years and years and years, guys, inked Archie.
Oh,
and you will start to notice when he does it, there's just a little, like, just take two tablespoons of Archie style and sprinkle it in there. You will start to see it. I especially see it in Breaker a lot in here. Like, the Breaker is a borderline Archie character in here. And I am in no way complaining at all. I think it's great. It's one of those things where I can kind of go, yep, that's D'Agostino, and that's the Archie coming out in him.
When I went back and collected these, when I was buying them, I was reading, the artist was M.D. Bright, and go back and get some of the Ron Wagners and some of these other ones. And I went back and got some of these. I was not originally a fan of Vosberg art. I have to be honest with you. But it's kind of grown on me. I think his covers are better than his internal work. I can't do a better job. But comparing to some of the later on, it wasn't. He's not my favorite Joe artist. So let's put it that way.
The thing that I will say for Vosberg, if I was his defense attorney, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that I will say about Vosberg is the same thing I would say about Herb Trimpe. Like, is Herb Trimpe ever going to draw anything that's just going to blow you away? Rarely. But is it good? Is it solid? Is it dependable? Yeah. And tip of the cap to Vosberg, I just mentioned, how many panels is he drawing?
Exactly. Yeah. There are details in them.
To good amounts of detail. Yeah. I mean, I get what you're saying, though, Jim. I mean, as far as like the bang quality of the art, I feel like he's more in camp with a Sal Buscema or a Trimpe, in that it's workmanlike. As you get older, especially when you get into making comics, I don't know if you guys know this, but I make some comics. When you get into that, you just start to respect the hell out of it. Like, the ability to put that much effort into it, that many panels, and make a deadline is more important than being a zip pow artist all the time. For the amount of stuff that he does, I frankly am impressed. But I do get what you're saying, Jim. It's early stuff.
And again, I'm not saying it's bad. Because then you open up the cover to issue 12, and there's that splash page where the vamp is chasing that van down the hill. That's great. I love that. And again, like you said, Jarrod, it's quick work, and
I want to talk about that page too, just for a second. Like, it's the first thing you read in the issue is San Francisco, 1,500 hours, right? You could clearly tell they were like, Vosberg, draw San Francisco, and he's like, okay, what do I know about this? Golden Gate Bridge, lots of hilly streets. Let's go. It's exactly what he did. You put the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and it's some really hilly streets.
One thing I do have to say, at least what Vosberg has going for him is Marvel never had to say, we're not printing your art like they did for Todd McFarlane on issue number 61.
I need to know more about this, because I know Todd worked on it. I should shut up and let you talk. Talk, Jim. Tell me the story.
Issue 60, Todd McFarlane did the cover and the inside work. 61, he did also, but it was so bad that they had to rush out and ask other artists to fill in because they didn't want to print that issue. What was originally 61. So other artists did the artwork for 61, then they published that, not the original Todd McFarlane artwork.
Okay. So there you see the difference between a guy like Vosberg and McFarlane. Yep. McFarlane's one of the greats, obviously, but he needs more time. And I don't know if you've heard this, Jim. I've heard this. I can't speak to it, whatever. I've met Larry several times. He's a wonderful guy. But I've also heard that to be his artist is demanding.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think young Todd was ready for that
either. Nope. The other thing about the artwork for issue 61, they did print it after the issue 155. They printed it and called it G.I. Joe Special #1. Mm-hmm. Which is the Snake Eyes in the crouching Spider-Man
one
pose, which is a lower print run than any other Joe comic, and it's worth some money. So we kind of got off a little bit with the art for Vosberg. Again, going back to Sierra Gorda mission, Snake Eyes Quinn and Dr. Venom trapped in the bunker. As Pat said, the way that Larry Hama wrote all of his stories, there's always a story ending, another one beginning. There was hardly ever. It's just a clean cut. Okay, storyline's over. Mm-hmm. There was always something going on, and this is where he started that, because you had the mystery of Destro, you had the Snake Eyes mystery, but you still had the Sierra Gorda going on. And in the issue 13, they're jumping out of the plane. Scarlet's got a little tear in her eye. This is very early on where we realize that Snake Eyes and Scarlet have
a relationship,
some kind of a relationship. So he's always putting that stuff in there, like you've alluded to, Pat.
And I was going on, what's going on? Why does she like Snake Eyes? I thought it was Duke.
You're about to me off, Pat.
Yeah.
Oh, Duke.
Anything else, Pat, before we move on to the next segment?
No, I think we covered it. I mean, there is a lot going on in issue 12 and 13. A lot of buildup, a lot of character moments, just really good time and storytelling going on in Joe history, Joe lore here. And I'm looking forward to, where this goes and reminiscing about it even more. Jarrod, did you have anything else?
Absolutely, Pat, and thanks for asking. Okay, because this is where my memory of G.I. Joe really starts to kick in. This is where, and this might be because I feel like might have been when I first started guesting on Aaron's show, Real American Headcast. Maybe that's why. But I did want to point out a couple things. I think as far as Jared's memories go, these are a lot stronger. So I'm going to be a little more selective. Don't worry, I won't take up a ton of time. In fact, let's just go straight to 13. We kind of exhausted 12, but I want to talk about 13. 13 has one of my very favorite G.I. Joe covers. So action-packed with the taxi going up into the back of the C-130. It's being attacked. And, it's so cool. And my favorite detail about it is how Vosberg and D'Agostino get their names on the cover via the license plate. I love it. Like every, cover artist that would squeeze their initials in somewhere. I love it when they build it into the moment. That's so cool. So it's just a high energy, cool cover that I just wanted to glow that up for just a second.
Makes you feel like you're in the action there. Like you're.
Yes. I mean, it's everything about it is a near perfect because it's energy. We talked about this on a recent episode of Spidey Chronicles, Pat. It's tilted. It's at a rakish angle.
Yeah.
It's tilted. Always tilt adds energy. It's got movement. Look at the movement lines at the bottom. The black move. Yep. That's the greatest podcast sound effect I ever just did. I feel like Belloc all of a sudden.
Technical term?
Yes. The whole. They've got movement lines on the ground. They got movement lines coming in from the left, a little bit from the right, more for the bullets on the right. It's just so energy. And then they do something very smart. They color the assaulting vehicle that's just barely on there in just a flat purple. So that makes everything else pop out, but you still have that menace there on the side. Mm-hmm. And it's an outstanding cover. So we will tip the cap to Vosberg and D'Agostino on that one. And while we're doing that, one of my favorite panels, sometimes as a comic creator, I just look at this panel and go, this is magic. It's on page 2 of the story. They've blown up, I think, the bunker, or maybe their boat. They blew up their boat, didn't they, at the end of the last one?
Yes. And they blew up both of them.
Yeah, they got them both, actually. And the guys are hiding out, waiting for the plane to go by. They're all holding their breath under the water. And that, at that bottom of the second page, that is comic book freaking magic. I want to point out everything that's right about this. I lied about me not taking a lot of time because I'm going to take a lot of time on this. This panel is incredible from every freaking aspect. Okay, the penciler and the inker drew these guys in the water so that you have to draw a floaty effect. So you have to have the arms kind of floaty. It's very not what you normally do in comics, right? So everyone has a floaty effect. Of course, they add the bubbles. I really love the detail of the ripples above them that really says, hey, they're under the water. They've included the floating wood debris.
Yeah.
And I'm still not done glowing it up yet. The coloring is perfect for underwater. It's dark green low to light green high, which is kind of like that's what your brain wants to see, filtered underwater colors. The shadow of the plane going over, and then the dialogue bubble. Who was the letter on this? I want to give credit where it's due. Joe Rosen.
Squiggly lines.
Yes, that I'm coming from underwater squiggly line to the plane. Yeah. So we're talking penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, every single one of them on the top of their game. This panel lives rent-free in my head, sir. It's great.
Now, Jarrod, do you want to bring up one of your favorite characters fighting a crocodile?
Absolutely. On the very next...
I figured you did. I figured you were going to.
You knew this was coming.
Oh, yeah.
This next page is where freaking Stalker fights a crocodile with a knife while dressed as Don Johnson from Miami Vice. And this was the moment, guys. This was the moment. I always liked Stalker. We talked about it, Jim, because I came in from the toy line. It's easy to like him because he looks different, right? He's got the camo and he's cool. Yep. And he's a black dude. He's the only black dude on the original team. He's the field leader. And he proves it here. He's so freaking badass right here. And you're just like, Stalker, yes. And it just hurts my heart to know that in like 10 issues, it's going to be Duke. And like, you better soak up these glorious Stalker moments, ladies and gentlemen, because...
Yeah, well, as a leader, but Stalker still has his moments later on.
He always will, yeah, because I think he's just one of those characters that has the favor of Hama, right? So he always will, but like this is freaking peak Stalker, just fighting a huge croc or gator, I think it's a gator, with a knife. It's great. It's so great. And then, of course, the way the issue ends on the cliffhanger with the tappity tap, tap, tap.
All right. So thanks for all that input. Now that we've discussed some overall storylines, let's dive into the next segment where we discuss new Joe and Cobra members, as well as supporting role characters in a segment we call Supporting the Troops.
Now, back to G.I. Joe.
These 6 issues introduce most of the characters from 1983 toy line. And what a great sophomore class it was. Some great characters, many of which are still relevant today, and many fan favorites. Along with great toy designs, Larry wrote each of these with a unique personality, and each of them got a small spotlight. So let's each pick a few of our favorite characters and how Larry used them in the storyline. To get this started, here are a list of characters that were introduced during these issues. For the Joes, there was Airborne, Doc, Gung Ho, Snow Job, Torpedo, and Wild Bill. And for the Cobras, the new characters were Destro, but he's in the shadows still. So, Pat, I'll let you go first. Who would you like to discuss?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and pick Snow Job. I think out of all these, he's gotten the most, probably a little bit more, panel time and what he does with his job. And, he liked the polar bears. To me, it's a cool vehicle. So, and his look too. You're starting to see the breakout characters where they're just not wearing the normal green shirts anymore and their uniforms. You're getting to see specialty people in this as well. So I like Snow Job. I think out of them, he's the coolest. I'm going to say Destro too, but
everybody likes Destro.
Yeah, everybody likes the Destro.
Jarrod and I talked about that a little bit on the toy episode, where this year they really broke out from that green, olive drab color scheme, branched out different military branches.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you mentioned, the environmental specialist, which I'm going to talk about Torpedo. The first time you see him is in where he goes and tries to rescue Snake Eyes from the bunker. But again, an environmental specialist where he got a cool look, broke away from that color scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go with Gung Ho because I always laugh. He had the craziest first introduction, Arctic mission, and he's on the back of a polar battle bear or laying in the snow, like you mentioned earlier, with no winter gear on. And, Rock and Roll mentioned that crazy gyrene, so
yeah,
Gung Ho was just, and that was a personality. He was that crazy guy that would do anything.
Yeah. And you know what? He continues to do that in issue 24.
Yes, you are correct.
When they captured Cobra Commander, and then he gets slashed by Storm Shadow. But of course, and he's out there again. You're in the freaking cold, and he's just got his vest on and
can't cover up that bird and ball.
No.
What else do you want to talk about, Pat? Who else?
I'll give another one to Doc as well too. I think you have a good character moments for Doc in this. How he kind of helps out the team and figures out the anti-poison and things like that. So another good introduction for Doc.
Issue 11, where most of these characters were introduced. I think Torpedo was the only one that wasn't introduced in issue 11. Larry finds a way to use their specialty on the mission. And he would have those issues where he just, I'm going to introduce every character they want me to in every vehicle, and then I can tell the story the rest of the time. and that was issue 11. But he still finds a way to tell a good story. So who we got left? Airborne. He was one that I never really was drawn to. Great character design, but I don't think he used them. No, I take that back. Larry did use them a couple more times. I remember issue 30 and 31, where Destro, Firefly, and one of the Freds attacks Snake Eyes' cabin. I know he uses them then. That's a standout story for Airborne.
Yeah.
And then Wild Bill. Jarrod, you got anything on Wild Bill?
I'm a Wild Bill fan because, he's a helicopter pilot, Cav pilot, just like my dad was. So I got a lot for me. I don't feel like he shines particularly in these intros. He gets much better love later on. But I do just want to do a tack on for Gung Ho. I think Gung Ho really comes into his own in issue 13 when Stalker's laid up and Gung Ho has to go into town and handle business, and handle business he does. He gets a very tough guy, badass moment in town. So to me, that's the moment. Like, you learn he's kind of crazy in the previous issue, but in 13, in Sierra Gordo, he shows that he can improvise. He's brave. He's quick on the draw. He's fast and decisive. Just wanted to glow him up a little bit.
Pat, you got anything else on these characters?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. All right. Thanks for your thoughts, guys. Now let's talk about some characters that were not figures created by Hasbro. Larry Hama created some non-toy characters so that he could tell more in-depth stories. Some of these characters would be a part of the comics, toys, and cartoons for several years to come, and others would be in the comic for a short time, but would have a profound effect on the Joes, as well as being fan favorites to this day. So let's discuss some of these supporting characters we found in these issues. There weren't as many supporting characters as there were in the first 7 issues, but they all left a legacy. So the ones that we want to talk about are Billy, Scarface, Dr. Venom, Sierra Gordo, and Pat. This wasn't originally on my list, but Pat had mentioned it earlier, Springfield. Sierra Gordo and Springfield, I feel, became characters. They were in the stories enough. They had the legacy, and they just became this thing that when you went to Springfield or Sierra Gordo, something was going to happen.
Something's happened, yeah.
Something's happening. Pat, what do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's go ahead and just talk about Billy a little bit. We all didn't know it was Billy until later on in the series. We find out that kid eventually becomes Billy, and just the story progression that it goes through there kind of makes you understand who Billy is due to the, what was done to him by his father, and just, the upbringing he had and why he was so against his dad and just wanted to kind of separate himself from him.
You're told that Billy was Cobra Commander's son. The Baroness and Major Blood tried to get him to shoot Cobra Commander.
Yeah.
So that's talk about messing with your head.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so, all the drugs he had. And then,
yeah.
Was he put in the brain scanner? Probably a few times. Who knows?
I want to talk about Scarface.
Mm-hmm.
He was introduced in issue 12. His storyline is very similar with, or travel the same path as Dr. Venom and Quinn. That same storyline where Dr. Venom's using Scarface, and as we'll discuss next episode, Scarface, he's not in for a good time. As we mentioned last episode, he created these guys so that he could use them and then not kill off figures.
Yeah, so like a bigger name figures, so then you can, yeah. And I could definitely see that. So Larry makes you kind of feel for these characters and then does what he does to them.
Get you invested in them.
Yeah, it definitely gets you invested in with Scarface through his kind of series that he goes through. You do feel kind of for this guy. He's just a guy that, he's not on the right team, but he's doing what he needs to do. And he just gets kind of pushed around by multiple other main characters.
He definitely gets used. All right. Which one do you want to talk about next, Pat?
Well, let's just quickly talk about Dr. Venom. I mean, we've kind of talked to him about before, so I wish he would have stayed around a little bit longer in this series. I think he was a good foil, I think he was a good adversary for the Joes. Cool story, cool kind of villain. He's got a lab coat, makes you think twice about having to go see a doctor, especially when the doctor's last name is Venom. Yeah,
but he had to be replaced by a different doctor that didn't wear a shirt and had a cape.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Let's roll the next two together, the Sierra Gordo and Springfield as characters. Springfield was kind of hinted at in issue 5, but it was confirmed that it was Cobra Base in issue 10. And Sierra Gordo, this is the first time we hear of Sierra Gordo, but it's used so many times in the Marvel run and IDW run. Even Devil's Due, I think they use it too, don't they? I think they do. So again, when I picked it up, special missions, there was a couple in Sierra Gordo where the October Guard got killed. That's where I was introduced to Sierra Gordo. And to go back and reread them all the way through, you get that appreciation for how he built that up over time. But your thoughts on Sierra Gordo and Springfield?
Well, I think Sierra Gordo is a place that Larry tends to go back to a lot, just to give you that outside of America, that other nation or country that, is kind of in a turmoil that he could kind of relate to and what he went through in his time of service as well, too. So just giving you another area for both the Joes and Cobra to kind of, manipulate around or just do things with and kind of fight over a different territory. And it's used really good in the stories.
Yeah, I find it funny later on. It's kind of hard to track. He gets into the revolutionaries and the counter-revolutionaries, and I think at some point it's like the counter-revolutionaries. That may be true, but it seems like it.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other characters that you can think of that I missed, Pat?
No, I think we covered them all.
Now we're going to roll into the final comic book segment we are calling Taking Cover.
It's unacceptable. Look, G.I. Joe is beating us in the snow.
In this segment, we will be discussing the covers of the comics. These bright and action-packed images that caught our attention and made us want to pick up the issue and see what happens in the story. The cover should represent what happens in the comic. Overall, the Marvel run of G.I. Joe comics did a good job at this. So, Pat, I've got 2 questions. And Jarrod, you can chime in as well. First, which of the issues we've discussed did the best job of representing the storyline and action that happened in the comic? And second, which cover was your favorite? They don't have to be the same answer.
Boy, it's a tough one on these. It is a tough one on these.
This was a hard batch because they all did a good job of representing what went on.
A little. I would say number 10, issue 10, not so much where and that's the Springfield one where you see a little town, but was the guy really hiding behind a fake house wall? No.
Yeah, I'd give you that one.
But the rest of them, the action that you see really does happen in them. Ooh, boy, these are tough to choose. I'll go with issue 11. I think that's a striking cover with the polar bear and Snow Job and Doc on it. They're also, the other ones are also good too. So
that's your favorite? Or is that the one that represents a action?
Yeah, I would say that would represent the action. I think my favorite is going to be 12 when they're diving off the boat.
The one that I think represents the action the most, I think is going to be, like you, issue 11, where you've got these guys being chased on the polar battle bear by the Viper. And my favorite, I think, is going to be issue 13, where they're being chased in the plane. That was one that when I was going back and collecting, I'm like, I got to find that one. Of this batch, that's my favorite. Jarrod, I know you got thoughts on it.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is why if you don't have access to the script, you'll mess up the show. I already glowed up these covers earlier on. And I know the whole time Jim was like, we got to have a section for this, Jarrod. I didn't know that. Anyways, as far as a very good representative cover, I will say 12. This is going to be my Vosberg glorious covers moment. I think 12 is a very good representative cover, as is 13, but I'm going to say 13 is my favorite. It's just such good energy. And I think we all knew that was coming because I mentioned it earlier.
Yeah. As Pat mentioned, all these are good. Picking my favorite covers is going to be difficult because I don't know of any bad Joe covers. There's a couple that are like not my favorite. We are now going to move into our final segment that we call Military Surplus.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe!
Here at the Outpost, on each episode, besides discussing the toys, comics, and cartoons of the highlighted year, we discuss a peripheral item related to G.I. Joe. This episode, we are going to discuss some items that I didn't know existed or forgot they existed until I started looking for what we were going to cover for this segment. But these items amazed me when I saw them. We are going to be discussing the official G.I. Joe accessories from 1982. And these are what looks like a pewter type of metal accessory. There's some pins, some dog tags, some bracelets. Items like these show how much Hasbro is going all in with advertising and marketing of this relaunch. I was looking through GeoJoe.com to see what I want to look at. And I saw these. I'm like, I have never seen these before. I will definitely be looking for them going forward because these are amazing. Anybody that's listening to this podcast can go to yojo.com and look up what they are calling the official G.I. Joe accessories. You'll be able to find them in their collectible archive section. So the first one is the Commando pin set. This pin is what it says. It's got a G.I. Joe logo with Commando underneath and looks like a submachine gun, similar to what Snake Eyes was using.
Out of all of them, I think this one's the coolest.
It's right up there.
It's got that Uzi kind of a gun, and then you got the G.I. Joe, and then you got Commando. And if I was a kid and I was playing, Army in that, if I could have that pinned onto my shirt, I'd be like, yeah, look at me.
I can chime in and tell you that these are kind of surprisingly affordable.
Really?
Oh, really?
I didn't do an eBay search.
I just did an eBay search, and I'm seeing someone has a lot of 6 of these things that we're about to talk about. I don't want to spoil everything you're going to talk about, but like just about everything we're going to talk about, $20 for them plus $5 shipping.
No,
that's not bad at all. I may have to break my cardinal rule of finding it in the wild because I don't think that's going to happen.
Really looking at them, the most you're going to pay per pin, and this is really your challenge, is like you said, they're rare. So you know how it is on eBay, you can get away with charging a bit more if you're one of a handful of people that has them.
Yep.
So I would say be prepared to pay up to maybe $40 per pen if you really want one. But like I said, I've seen people buying a whole set of them for $16. So basically, if you bide your time and you're patient, you can do well.
The next one is the dog tag set, which is pretty much that's what you got. You got a couple dog tags on a chain with the G.I. Joe logo on it. Now, I should have mentioned when we first started, the art for this, you got the G.I. Joe logo on top and Grunt in the background, and then whatever accessory is on the front and on the back, it has all of the different options. So the dog tags, pretty similar to what you think a dog tag is.
Yeah, definitely. It's just a dog tag metal.
Yeah.
It's got G.I. Joe on the front, and on the back, you can put your name. I can't really see what else you can put on there.
Probably name, address, phone number. I don't know.
Yeah. Email address, I think.
Back in the 80s, I don't think they had that.
Oh, no. Yeah.
They didn't even know what email was. I think I was still getting Pony Express. Third one, ID bracelet. I remember these being popular in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. A little ID, just a little some metal. And I wonder, after a while, if you wore this around, that cheap metal, your hand would turn green or whatever.
It would turn your wrist green. Yeah. Well, then you'd have camouflage.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. And the last one we're going to discuss today, there's more. We'll finish those up on the next 1983 comic book episode. But the last one we're going to talk about, the key ring with dog tag and bullet charm. Now, I have to admit, that bullet's pretty slick.
I could definitely see having, getting something like this and then just using that either on your keychain or for something else. This would be kind of cool to have.
It's a small key ring with a clip. Looks like a smaller dog tag than what the actual dog tag set is. And then a bullet with a ring on it so you can keep them all on that clip. These I thought were unique because I didn't even know these existed.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen them at all or remember seeing them as a kid at a store.
Me. But as you guys have been talking, I've been looking up each one of these on eBay, and like you can get them in those packages, like still in the packaging, like we see them. $25, maybe $40, maybe $50 still in the package, but like that's not bad at all if you want to really collect this stuff,
No.
Yeah. I think out of these 4, I would like that Commando one. I think that's kind of cool.
I agree. Of these 4, that's my favorite one.
Yeah. Then I'd take the keychain.
I think you guys have expensive taste. I think the Commando one, I think that's the one that sells the best because it's commanding the $30, $40, $50 price even loose. The other ones, you get that sealed. I kind of dig the dog tag and the bracelet.
The bracelet isn't bad.
I just wish I'd known about these when I was in the military because I would have ordered the Commando pin and put it on my uniform until somebody noticed. That would have been awesome. People would have been like, how did you get that? And I said, it's not for everybody.
All right. So, Pat, any closing thoughts on anything we talked about today?
Just that I'm really excited for this era. We continue to talk about it. It is just the beginning of where the series will go. I mean, it went 155 and then another 150 with the next series that was on. And now it's going to go again. You know, there are over 300 issues.
And the Devils do.
And the Devils do run it. Yeah. Just what this has become is so amazing. And to see its roots being done here and throughout here. Very cool.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to bring up too. The stuff from the IDW run, there's still stories in that were rooted in these 6 issues that we just talked about with the Sierra Gordo. And Dr. Venom is brought back in the IDW run. And Quinn has even got a little factor in some of it. You can't have Joe without these 6 issues. Okay, Jarrod, real quick, any closing thoughts?
Oh, it was fun to revisit this era. It's definitely interesting snapshot in time to watch Larry be handed this property, and I don't want to. I was about to say sort of clumsily go through the first 10 or so, but I don't mean that necessarily in a negative way. Just like he's figuring it out, like characters, and I think he lucked in. Like I think he lucked into a pretty good quote unquote clumsy phase. Like I think he got a lot of things right, and then you can just see when he hits that right about 12. The Sierra Gordo. Once he hits that, it's like I got it. I've got a master plan, even though we know he didn't. Larry admits that, and to be honest with you, I write the same way. I haven't done a huge long series like Larry does, but I do have some things that I've written in series, and even Hamilton versus Burr Werewolf Tale, I just started writing, and for some reason they always magically end right about where you want a 48-page book to end. So yeah, I think I learned a lot subconsciously from this man. But it is just neat, especially on this episode. I feel like this episode in particular of Outpost is the one where it goes from clumsy to smooth. And again, I'm using clumsy not negatively. Yeah. He had a fantastic quote unquote clumsy period.
You can see the things that he was trying to do, or at least I would say what he was trying to get away with, right? He was trying to, because he's stuck between Hasbro and Marvel, just because Marvel wants the money and they don't want him to do something that, Hasbro to pull the money from them. But just to find his storytelling and, the side characters. I mean, we all love these side characters that they never made any figures on.
As Jarrod said, the clumsy period, a lot of one-shots. As he said, as once issue 10, 11, 12, you could just see he just ramped right up. Well, what would be the first 7 issues that he wrote that we covered last issue were all great, but I think Hasbro was still trying to just kind of release him a little bit, letting him do a little bit here, a little bit there. And once they saw that he had it, they let him go. And they just said, hey, just put these vehicles and figures in the comic book and you can do whatever you want. Thank you for joining Pat, Jarrod, and myself for this episode of G.I. Joe Outpost. Pat, thank you for spending time discussing great comics. Jarrod, thank you for your insight. And if our listeners wanted to contact you, Pat, where would they find you?
Well, Jim, I'm glad you asked. You can find me on the Twitter at Christatos01. Otherwise, I'm hanging out on episodes on the Longbox Crusade network here.
Jarrod, how about you? Where can people find you?
You can find me in lots of different places. I am at Yard Sale Artist on X, Facebook, Instagram. You can check out my artwares at www.theyardsaleartist.com. You can find me at your local Wendy's, probably choking down a Baconator.
And you can find me on Facebook at Jim Miel, JIMMIEL, as well as Timbers Toys and Customs on Facebook, where I post some of my shows, some of the custom work I'm doing. Check me out there, as well as on X as Jim the Joe Junkie. I want to thank everyone at the Longbox Crusade Network for adding G.I. Joe Outpost to their extensive line of shows. Take a listen to all the other shows that are on the Longbox Crusade on any podcatcher or on YouTube. And if you like what you hear, go to Patreon and become a Crusader Club member where you get all the access. Join us next time where we will be discussing another 8 episodes of the Sunbow cartoon. Till next time, dismissed.
The music themes for this show are done by musical genius Joe November. Please check out his SoundCloud at Josephline99. That's JOSEFLIN99. You will not regret it.
Yeah, let's do this.
Who's your favorite shirtless character, G.I. Joe character?
Fairness.
Oh, good.
It was easy.
I must help him. I just watched episode 1 of the last night. I was like, I'm going to watch some Joe. So I got, Duke in my head.
That's where he was 2-time in the, that miniseries, he was 2-time in Scarlet.
Mm-hmm.
How about
the slave girl?
I could go on. This is definitely where I start hitting my vibe of Joe, but I'm going to stop because I know you have a time limit at some point.
Not so much a time limit, but bedtime.
On this episode of Outpost, everyone falls asleep while Jarrod talks about perfect panels in the issue.
And then on page 2, panel 3B.
It feels like an old LONGBOX, Pat.
Yes.
Joe.
Yo, Joe.
Joe.
Joe.